In the heart of ancient China, during the Tang dynasty of the 7th century, there lived a Buddhist monk whose journey would become one of the most beloved tales ever told. This is the story of Journey to the West, a narrative that began not in the realm of fiction, but in the footsteps of a real historical figure named Xuanzang, who embarked on an extraordinary pilgrimage to India in the year 629 CE. Xuanzang was no ordinary monk. Driven by a profound desire to obtain authentic Buddhist scriptures and resolve contradictions in the Chinese translations of sacred texts, he defied an imperial travel ban and set out westward alone. His journey would span 17 years, covering over 10,000 miles through some of the most treacherous terrain on Earth, across the scorching Taklamakan Desert, over the towering peaks of the Pamir Mountains, and through kingdoms that have long since faded into history. When Xuanzang finally returned to Chang'an, the Tang capital, in 645 CE, he brought with him something precious beyond measure: 657 Buddhist texts, along with Buddhist relics and statues. Emperor Taizong, who had initially forbidden travel to the West, welcomed him back as a hero, and Xuanzang spent the remaining years of his life translating these sacred scriptures, fundamentally shaping Chinese Buddhism forever. But it would be centuries before this historical journey transformed into the fantastical epic we know today. The novel Journey to the West wasn't written until the 16th century, during the Ming Dynasty, attributed to a scholar named Wu Cheng'an. Published around 1592, this literary masterpiece took Xuanzang's real pilgrimage and wove it into a tapestry of mythology, folklore, and spiritual allegory that had been passed down through generations of oral storytelling. Wu Cheng'an's genius was in taking a true story of devotion and endurance and elevating it into something mythical. The historical monk became Tang Sanzang, a figure of pure compassion but also of vulnerability, who would require supernatural protection on his westward journey. And it is here that the novel's most famous character emerges, not the monk himself, but his guardian, the irrepressible Monkey King, Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong's origin story is perhaps the most captivating element of the entire novel. Born from a magic stone that had sat atop the mountain of flowers and fruit since the beginning of creation, this stone monkey came into being when it was nourished by the elements, heaven and earth, sun and moon, until one day it cracked open to reveal a fully formed stone monkey with eyes that shot beams of golden light into the heavens. This was no ordinary birth, and Sun Wukong would prove to be no ordinary being. After learning supernatural abilities from a Taoist patriarch, including the famous 72 transformations that allowed him to shapeshift into virtually anything, and cloud somersaulting that let him travel 108,000 li, roughly 33,500 miles, in a single leap, the Monkey King's powers became nearly limitless. He could transform individual hairs from his body into clones of himself, change his size from as small as a tiny insect to as large as a towering giant, and his magical staff, the Rui Jingu Bang, could expand or shrink according to his will, normally resting as a tiny needle behind his ear. But power without wisdom led to chaos. Sun Wukong's pride and rebellious nature caused him to wreak havoc across the cosmos, declaring himself great sage equal to heaven and eventually eating the peaches of immortality from the garden of the Queen Mother of the West, drinking the wine of the celestial realm, and consuming Laozi's pills of longevity, effectively making himself 5 times immortal and nearly indestructible. His rebellion against the heavenly order could not stand, and it would take the intervention of Buddha himself to finally subdue the Monkey King, trapping him beneath a mountain for 500 years, waiting for the moment when his strength would be needed for a greater purpose, to protect a humble monk on an impossible journey to the West. And so, 5 centuries passed while Sun Wukong lay imprisoned beneath the mountain of 5 elements, placed there by Buddha's own hand. The mountain was sealed with a golden inscription containing the sacred words Om Mani Padme Hum, and the once mighty Monkey King could do nothing but wait, fed by passing travelers who took pity on him, his supernatural powers held in check by the weight of divine punishment. Meanwhile, in the heavens, a plan was taking shape. The Bodhisattva Guanyin, the embodiment of compassion in Buddhist tradition, was tasked by Buddha with a sacred mission, to find a worthy monk who would travel to the Western Paradise, India, the birthplace of Buddhism, to retrieve the authentic Buddhist scriptures and bring them back to China, where they could guide countless souls toward enlightenment. This journey would not merely be a physical pilgrimage across dangerous lands, but a spiritual odyssey that would test the very nature of faith, compassion, and perseverance. Guanyin descended to the mortal realm and began preparing for this momentous journey. She knew that the monk who would undertake this quest would need protection, for the path to the west was fraught with dangers both earthly and supernatural. Along her way, she gathered guardians who would accompany the chosen monk, beings who, like Sun Wukong, were serving penance for their own past transgressions and would find redemption through service to this holy cause. The monk chosen for this sacred task was Tang Sanzang, known also as Tripitaka, a name meaning 3 baskets in reference to the 3 collections of Buddhist scriptures. In Wu Cheng'en's novel, Tang Sanzang is portrayed as the reincarnation of Golden Cicada, one of Buddha's disciples who had been cast down to the mortal realm as punishment for his inattention during a sermon. Through 10 lifetimes of reincarnation as a virtuous monk, he had purified his soul, and now in his final mortal incarnation, he was ready for this ultimate test. According to the novel's mystical elements, Tang Sanzang's flesh was believed to grant immortality to any demon who consumed it, making him a constant target for the supernatural creatures that lurked along the route to India. The Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty, in the novel's version of events, personally selected Tang Sanzang for this mission and bestowed upon him the journey's formal authorization. In a ceremonial send-off, the emperor handed Tang Sanzang a golden alms bowl and official documents that would identify him as an imperial envoy, then stepped down from his throne to pour wine for the monk with his own hands, an extraordinary gesture of respect that demonstrated the mission's importance to the empire itself. As Tang Sanzang began his westward journey, traveling alone through the early stages, he eventually reached the mountain of 5 elements. There, he heard a voice calling out from beneath the stone. It was Sun Wukong, who had been waiting 500 years for this precise moment. The Monkey King promised to serve as the monk's disciple and protector if only Tang Sanzang would free him. Following Guanyin's instructions, the monk removed the golden seal from the mountain, and in an explosive moment, Sun Wukong burst free, his imprisonment finally ended. But Guanyin, wise to Sun Wukong's uncontrollable nature, had prepared a safeguard. She provided Tang Sanzang with a golden circlet, a magical headband, which the monk tricked Sun Wukong into wearing. Once placed upon the Monkey King's head, the circlet could never be removed, and whenever Tang Sanzang recited the Tightening Sutra, a special spell, the band would constrict painfully around Sun Wukong's skull, bringing the powerful warrior to his knees in agony. This became the means by which the gentle monk could control his wild and impulsive protector, though Tang Sanzang, being compassionate by nature, used this power sparingly and often struggled with the moral weight of causing his disciple pain. Thus began the true journey to the West, a monk who represented pure faith but lacked physical strength, accompanied by a warrior of unmatched power but lacking in patience and wisdom. Together, they would travel westward, and soon they would be joined by others, Zhu Beiji, the pig demon who had once been the marshal of the heavenly canopy before being cast down for his lustful behavior at a celestial banquet, and Sha Wujing, the river demon who had formerly been the curtain-lifting general in heaven before breaking a precious crystal goblet and receiving his own earthly punishment. Each member of this unlikely fellowship carried their own burdens, their own past mistakes, and their own path to redemption. The journey ahead would span 14 years and cover approximately 108,000 li, requiring the pilgrims to overcome exactly 81 tribulations, a number heavy with Buddhist significance, representing the trials one must endure on the path to enlightenment. With each demon defeated, each hardship overcome, and each moment of doubt conquered, they would move one step closer not just to India, but to their own spiritual transformation. As Tang Sanzang and Sun Wukong continued their westward journey, the landscape gradually transformed from the familiar territories of Tang China into wilder, more mysterious lands. The path ahead would lead them through dense forests where ancient spirits dwelled, across rivers that concealed underwater kingdoms, and into mountain ranges where demons had established their own domains, far from the reach of heavenly authority. It wasn't long before they encountered their third companion. In a place called Gao Village, the pilgrims heard tales of a pig monster who had taken a farmer's daughter as his wife. This creature was Zhu Beiji, whose name literally translates to Pig of Eight Prohibitions, referring to the 8 Buddhist precepts he had been commanded to follow as part of his penance. But Zhu Beiji's commitment to these prohibitions was, shall we say, inconsistent at best. In his former celestial life, he had been Marshal Tianpeng, commander of 80,000 naval soldiers in heaven's forces, a position of tremendous prestige and power. However, during the heavenly peach banquet hosted by the Queen Mother of the West, he became intoxicated and attempted to flirt with the moon goddess Chang'e, a transgression so serious that the Jade Emperor sentenced him to be reincarnated in the mortal realm. But even divine justice can go awry. As Zhu Beiji's soul descended to earth for reincarnation, he accidentally fell into a pig pen, and thus was reborn not as a human but as a creature with a pig's head and a human body. Despite his monstrous appearance, he retained his celestial strength and wielded a 9-toothed iron rake that weighed over 5,000 pounds, a weapon he had received from the Jade Emperor himself during his days as a heavenly marshal. When Sun Wukong confronted him and revealed that Guanyin had designated him to be part of Tang Sanzang's pilgrimage, Zhu Beiji agreed to join, though his motivations were less pure than the monk might have hoped. Where Tang Sanzang sought enlightenment and Sun Wukong sought redemption, Zhu Beiji primarily sought an easier life and harbored dreams of eventually returning to heaven's comforts. The dynamic between Sun Wukong and Zhu Beiji added a new dimension to the journey. While the Monkey King was clever, energetic, and fiercely loyal despite his occasional impatience with his master, Zhu Beiji was lazy, gluttonous, and often cowardly, yet his character brought a certain earthiness to the pilgrimage. He complained about the hardships of travel, constantly thought about food and pretty women, and frequently suggested giving up and returning home. In many ways, Zhu Beiji represented the ordinary human struggle with temptation and comfort, making him perhaps the most relatable character despite his monstrous form. Their band grew to 4 when they reached the Flowing Sands River, a treacherous waterway that no mortal could cross. Here dwelled Shao Wujing, known in English translations as Sandy or the Sand Monk, whose appearance was described as terrifying: red hair, blue-black skin, and a necklace made from the skulls of 9 monks who had attempted to cross his river. Like his companions, Shao Wujing was once a celestial being, specifically the curtain-lifting general who stood beside the Jade Emperor during heavenly audiences. His fall from grace came when he accidentally shattered a precious crystal goblet during a celestial peach banquet, the very same banquet where Zhu Beiji had made his fateful mistake. For this seemingly minor offense, Shao Wujing received a punishment that seemed extraordinarily harsh. He was banished to the mortal realm and condemned to be pierced by flying swords 7 times a day. The constant pain and isolation transformed him into a fearsome creature who attacked anyone attempting to cross his river. But when Guanyin appeared to him with news of the pilgrimage, she offered him the same opportunity for redemption she had offered the others. His weapon was a demon-quelling staff, and though he was the least powerful of the three disciples in terms of combat ability, Xiao Wujing proved to be the most steadfast and reliable, never complaining about carrying the luggage or performing menial tasks. With Xiao Wujing's addition, the fellowship was nearly complete, though there was one more member, the White Dragon Horse. This magnificent creature was actually the third son of Ao Run, the Dragon King of the West Sea, and his true name was Yulong. He had committed the crime of setting fire to the pearls in his father's palace, an act of rebellion that resulted in his death sentence. Once again, it was Guanyin who intervened, saving him from execution and stationing him in Eagle Grief Gorge to wait for the pilgrim monk. When Tang Sanzang's original horse was devoured by this dragon, Sun Wukong sought Guanyin's help, and she transformed the dragon into a white horse that would carry Tang Sanzang for the remainder of the journey. Though the Dragon Prince rarely spoke or took human form during the pilgrimage, he remained vigilant and would transform back into his dragon form when his master faced the gravest dangers. The novel's structure is built around the number of trials the pilgrims face, and this number, 81, is deeply symbolic in Chinese Buddhism and numerology. The number 9 represents the highest single digit and thus extreme yang energy in Chinese cosmology, and 9 multiplied by 9 equals 81, creating a number of ultimate completeness. Each tribulation the pilgrims faced was designed to test different aspects of their character: Tang Sanzang's faith and compassion, Sun Wukong's obedience and humility, Zhu Beiji's self-control and commitment, and Xiao Wujing's patience and endurance. These trials took many forms. Some were physical battles against demons who commanded armies or possessed devastating magical powers. Others were tests of perception, where demons disguised themselves as innocent victims or even as Buddhist deities to deceive Tang Sanzang's compassionate heart. Still others were trials of desire, where the pilgrims were tempted with wealth, power, comfort, or romantic love. The journey was never simply about reaching a geographic destination, it was about the internal transformation that occurred along the way, as each character confronted and gradually overcame their deepest flaws. As the pilgrims ventured deeper into the unknown territories of the West, they discovered that the dangers they faced were not merely random encounters with hostile creatures. Many of the demons and spirits that opposed them were themselves part of a larger cosmic order, and some of the most formidable adversaries had unexpected connections to the heavenly realm itself. One of the most significant revelations in the novel concerns the nature of these demon antagonists. Several of the most powerful demons that Tang Sanzang and his disciples encountered were actually escaped mounts, pets, or servants of Buddhist and Taoist deities. The Golden Horned King and Silver Horned King, for instance, were revealed to be the transformed golden and silver horn boys who served Taishan Laojun, the supreme Taoist deity. The yellow-robed demon was actually Koemu Lang, one of the 28 constellations in heaven who had descended to earth. This pattern repeated throughout the journey. Demons would be defeated by the pilgrims only for a deity to arrive at the last moment and claim the creature as their own property, whisking it back to heaven with little more than a mild reprimand. This recurring motif speaks to one of the novel's deeper philosophical layers. The journey to the West suggests that the line between good and evil, between celestial and demonic, is far more blurred than it might initially appear. These demons were not inherently evil beings born from darkness, they were celestial creatures who had strayed from their posts, often out of boredom, desire, or simple curiosity about the moral realm. Their return to heaven after causing chaos on earth raised questions about justice and accountability that the novel presents without easy answers. The pilgrims' adventures took them through landscapes that blended real geography with pure fantasy. While Xuanzang's historical route did pass through actual locations like the Kingdom of Gaochang and the oasis city of Turfan, Wu Cheng'en's novel transformed these places into magical kingdoms with names like the Kingdom of Women, the Land of Qi, and the Kingdom of Bixaland. Some locations in the novel can be traced to real places along the Silk Road, while others exist purely in the realm of myth, creating a journey that operates simultaneously on earthly and spiritual planes. One of the most famous episodes in the entire novel takes place in the Kingdom of Women, also called the Women's Country, where the population consisted entirely of females. This land had a magical spring called the Mother and Child River, and anyone who drank its water would become pregnant regardless of their gender. When Tang Sanzang and Zhu Beiji unknowingly drank from this river, they found themselves inexplicably pregnant, leading to a comedic yet philosophically rich sequence where the male pilgrims confronted the concept of childbirth. The queen of the kingdom, struck by Tang Sanzang's gentle nature and noble bearing, wished to marry him and make him her king, presenting the monk with perhaps his greatest temptation, a life of comfort, power, and earthly love rather than the harsh road of spiritual seeking. Tang Sanzang's character throughout these trials remained remarkably consistent. Despite possessing no supernatural powers of his own, and despite being physically weak compared to his disciples, the monk demonstrated an unwavering commitment to his mission. However, Wu Cheng'en portrayed him not as a flawless saint but as a deeply human figure who struggled with genuine limitations. Tang Sanzang's most significant flaw was his inability to perceive demonic disguises. Time and again, demons would transform themselves into helpless humans, and the monk's compassionate nature would not allow him to turn them away, even when Sun Wukong insisted they were monsters in disguise. This led to one of the most repeated conflicts in the novel. Sun Wukong could see through demonic transformations with his fiery eyes and golden gaze, a power he had acquired after being refined in Laozi's furnace during his rebellion against heaven, but Tang Sanzang could not. When Sun Wukong would strike down what appeared to be an innocent person, the monk would be horrified and would punish his disciple by reciting the Tightening Sutra, causing the Monkey King excruciating pain. The most famous instance of this occurred in the episode of the White Bone Demon, also known as Baigujing, a spirit who transformed herself 3 times, first as a young maiden, then as an elderly woman, and finally as an old man, each time claiming to be a family member of the previous form. The White Bone Demon desired to eat Tang Sanzang's flesh to gain immortality, but each time she approached in disguise, Sun Wukong saw through the illusion and struck her down. After the 3rd killing, even though Sun Wukong showed his master the demon's true skeletal form, Tang Sanzang was convinced that his disciple had murdered 3 innocent people and was becoming uncontrollably violent. In his anger and disappointment, the monk expelled Sun Wukong from the pilgrimage, sending the Monkey King back to his mountain of flowers and fruit in disgrace. This separation represented one of the journey's most painful moments, as the bond between master and disciple was severed not by external force but by a fundamental inability to trust and understand one another. Sun Wukong's banishment didn't last forever, of course. When Tang Sanzang was subsequently captured by a powerful demon, one too strong for Zhu Beiji and Xiao Wujing to defeat alone, it was Zhu Beiji who swallowed his pride and jealousy to travel to the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit to beg Sun Wukong to return. The Monkey King, despite his hurt and anger, couldn't abandon his master to death. This pattern of separation and reunion occurred several times throughout the novel, each instance deepening the relationship between the impulsive, powerful disciple and the gentle, faithful master. Their dynamic illustrated a central Buddhist teaching, that wisdom and compassion must work together, that insight without kindness becomes cruelty, while compassion without discernment becomes foolishness. Among the many adversaries the pilgrims faced on their westward journey, none were more formidable than the demon kings who had established their own kingdoms and wielded powers that rivaled even those of heaven's greatest warriors. These were not mere monsters lurking in caves, but sophisticated beings who commanded armies, possessed magical treasures, and sometimes even maintained diplomatic relations with celestial authorities. The Bull Demon King stands as perhaps the most significant of these demon monarchs, not only because of his immense power but because of his complex history with Sun Wukong himself. Long before the pilgrimage began, during Sun Wukong's rebellious youth, the Monkey King had sworn brotherhood with 6 other powerful demon kings, forming the Brotherhood of 7 Sages. The Bull Demon King was the eldest of these brothers and the most powerful, commanding respect even from Sun Wukong. This ancient bond made their eventual confrontation during the pilgrimage all the more tragic, as former brothers found themselves on opposite sides of a cosmic conflict. The Bull Demon King's family became central to one of the journey's most elaborate and dangerous trials. His wife was Princess Iron Fan, also known as Rakshasi, who possessed one of the most powerful magical treasures in the entire novel, the Plantain Leaf Fan. This was no ordinary fan. With a single wave, it could extinguish fires across vast distances, and with multiple waves, it could create winds strong enough to blow a person 84,000 li away. The pilgrims needed this fan desperately because their path was blocked by the flaming mountains, an impassable range where fires burned eternally, making the land scorched and barren for hundreds of miles in every direction. The origin of the flaming mountains themselves traced back to Sun Wukong's own past misdeeds. When the Monkey King had rebelled against heaven centuries earlier, the celestial authorities had attempted to execute him by placing him in Laozi's 8 trigrams furnace, hoping to reduce him to ash. Instead, Sun Wukong survived the 49 days of refinement, gaining his fiery eyes and golden gaze, and when he kicked open the furnace in his escape, several burning coals fell to earth. These divine coals became the flaming mountains, meaning that Sun Wukong now had to overcome an obstacle born from his own rebellious past, a poetic form of karmic consequence. Princess Iron Fan initially refused to lend her fan to the pilgrims because of a deep family grievance. The Bull Demon King and Princess Iron Fan had a son named Red Boy, also known as the Holy Child King, who was himself a powerful demon with the ability to breathe supernatural fire. Earlier in the journey, Red Boy had captured Tang Sanzang and attempted to eat him, but Sun Wukong had sought help from Guanyin, who defeated Red Boy and took him as her attendant, giving him the name Sudana. While this was technically a form of redemption for Red Boy, serving a bodhisattva was considered a great honor. His parents viewed it as the pilgrims stealing their beloved son, and Princess Iron Fan's rage towards Sun Wukong was personal and deep. The confrontation over the Plantain Leaf Fan became one of the longest and most complex sequences in the entire novel, spanning multiple chapters and requiring Sun Wukong to employ every trick in his repertoire. He first attempted to borrow the fan politely, then resorted to trickery, transforming himself into a tiny insect and flying into Princess Iron Fan's tea, entering her stomach and threatening to tear her apart from within unless she surrendered the fan. She gave him a fan, but it was a fake that made the flames grow stronger rather than extinguishing them. Sun Wukong then sought help from the local earth deity, who revealed that only the genuine plant and leaf fan could solve their problem. The battle escalated when the Bull Demon King himself became involved, defending his wife against Sun Wukong. What followed was a spectacular display of transformation magic, with both combatants shifting through dozens of different forms in rapid succession. The Bull Demon King would transform into a giant bird, and Sun Wukong would become a hawk to pursue him. The Bull King would become a fish, and Sun Wukong would become a cormorant to catch him. This shape-shifting duel demonstrated not just their combat abilities but their deep understanding of the natural world and the relationships between different creatures, predator and prey, hunter and hunted, each transformation a move in an elaborate chess game of survival. Eventually, the conflict grew so intense that it drew the attention of heaven itself. The celestial authorities dispatched the 4 heavenly kings and other divine warriors to assist in subduing the Bull Demon King, revealing that even the most powerful demons ultimately existed within heaven's jurisdiction. The Bull Demon King's true form was revealed to be an enormous white bull, and in this form, he was finally subdued. Princess Iron Fan agreed to lend the genuine plant and leaf fan after her husband's defeat, and Sun Wukong used it to extinguish the flaming mountains forever, not only allowing the pilgrims to pass but also restoring fertility to the scorched land, benefiting all the local inhabitants who had suffered for generations. This episode illustrated several of the novel's recurring themes. First, it showed how past actions create present obstacles. Sun Wukong had to overcome a barrier literally created by his own rebellion. Second, it demonstrated that even the strongest individuals cannot succeed alone. Sun Wukong needed assistance from heaven to defeat his former sworn brother. Third, it revealed how family bonds and loyalties complicate moral judgments. The Bull Demon King and Princess Iron Fan were not purely evil, but rather parents protecting what they saw as their son's kidnapping. And finally, it showed that redemption often requires confronting and making amends for past relationships and past wrongs, no matter how painful that confrontation might be. As the pilgrims pressed onward through their seemingly endless journey, they discovered that the spiritual landscape they traversed was far more intricate than a simple division between heaven and earth, between the righteous and the wicked. The cosmology presented in Journey to the West reflects a uniquely Chinese synthesis of Buddhist, Taoist, and folk religious traditions, creating a universe of staggering complexity and wonder. At the pinnacle of this cosmic hierarchy sat the Jade Emperor, known as Yuhuang Dadi, the supreme ruler of heaven in Chinese folk religion and Taoism. In the novel, the Jade Emperor presides over the celestial bureaucracy from his palace in the highest heaven, surrounded by countless ministries, departments, and offices that mirror the imperial administration of earthly China. Every aspect of the natural world, from thunder and lightning to rain and wind, is governed by specific deities who report through this heavenly chain of command. When Sun Wukong rebelled against heaven in his youth, it was ultimately the Jade Emperor who had to request Buddha's intervention, acknowledging that even heaven's supreme ruler had limits to his power when faced with such an extraordinary opponent. But the Jade Emperor was not the only supreme being in this universe. Journey to the West presents a cosmology where multiple religious traditions coexist and even cooperate. Buddha, residing in the western paradise of Lane Temple on Vulture Peak, represents the Buddhist hierarchy and possesses powers that transcend even those of the Jade Emperor. It was Buddha who trapped Sun Wukong beneath the Mountain of 5 Elements, and it was Buddha who initiated the entire pilgrimage by recognizing that the people of the East needed authentic scriptures to guide their spiritual development. This coexistence of Taoist and Buddhist supreme beings reflects the historical reality of medieval China, where these two great traditions often competed for influence yet also borrowed freely from each other's philosophies and practices. Throughout the journey, the pilgrims frequently required assistance from various bodhisattvas and celestial beings, but none appeared more often than Guanyin, the bodhisattva of compassion. Guanyin's role in the novel extends far beyond simply organizing the pilgrimage at Buddha's request. She personally intervened in numerous crises, rescuing the pilgrims from demons they could not defeat on their own, providing magical solutions to seemingly impossible obstacles, and offering guidance when the path forward seemed unclear. Her residence on Mount Padalaka, surrounded by her attendants including the Dragon Girl and the boy Sudama, formerly Red Boy, served as a sanctuary where the pilgrims could seek refuge and counsel. Guanyin's characterization as female in the novel is particularly significant, as this bodhisattva had transformed from male depictions in earlier Indian Buddhism to predominantly female representations in Chinese culture, embodying the gentle, nurturing aspects of compassion. The pilgrim's journey also brought them into contact with the underworld, the realm of the dead governed by the 10 kings of hell and overseen by Yama, the god of death. In one memorable episode, the pilgrims descended into the underworld itself when they needed to retrieve someone from death or negotiate with the afterlife's bureaucracy. This underworld was depicted not as a place of eternal torment but as another bureaucracy, complete with ledgers recording every soul's lifespan and karmic accounts. The fact that Sun Wukong had once invaded this realm and crossed out his own name and the names of all monkeys from the Book of Life and Death, making them immortal, was another layer of his complex relationship with death and authority. The magical treasures that appear throughout Journey to the West represent another fascinating aspect of the novel's world building. These objects possessed powers that could alter reality itself, and they were coveted by demons and deities alike. Sun Wukong's Rui Jingu Bang, his famous staff, originally belonged to the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea and was used by the Great Yu to measure the depths of the cosmic ocean when he was controlling the primordial floods. The staff weighed 17,550 pounds, yet Sun Wukong could wield it effortlessly and shrink it to the size of a needle to store behind his ear. Zhu Beiji's nine-toothed rake and Sha Wujing's demon-quelling staff were similarly divine weapons granted during their time as heavenly officials, each inscribed with magical properties that made them effective against supernatural foes. But beyond these permanent weapons, the pilgrims encountered dozens of other magical treasures during their journey. Some demons possessed ropes that could bind anyone regardless of their strength, gourds that could suck people inside and dissolve them, or vials that could contain entire seas. The flaming mountains required the plant and leaf fan, while other obstacles demanded different specific solutions. This emphasis on magical objects reflects the Chinese literary tradition of treasures as expressions of cosmic power and the folk belief that enlightenment and achievement often require not just personal virtue but also the right tools, the right helpers, and the right timing, a very different philosophy from purely individualistic approaches to spiritual development. One of the most philosophically significant elements of the journey was the concept that Tang Sanzang himself was a source of power, though in a passive sense. The recurring motif of demons attempting to capture and consume the monk stems from the belief that his flesh could grant immortality because he was the reincarnation of Golden Cicada, who had been one of Buddha's direct disciples for 10 lifetimes. This meant that Tang Sanzang had accumulated immense spiritual purity across multiple incarnations, making his very body a kind of treasure more valuable than any magical object. The irony, of course, was that this purity made him simultaneously the most important member of the pilgrimage and the most vulnerable, requiring constant protection from those who were spiritually less refined but physically more powerful. The novel also explores the concept of filial piety and duty through the backstory of Tang Sanzang's birth, which is detailed in the early chapters. According to the novel, Tang Sanzang's father was murdered by bandits, and his pregnant mother was forced to marry one of the killers to survive. She set the infant Tang Sanzang afloat on a river in a basket, hoping someone would save him, and he was indeed rescued and raised by Buddhist monks. Years later, after Tang Sanzang had grown and learned his father's fate, he was able to avenge his father's death and reunite with his mother, fulfilling his filial obligations before embarking on the westward journey. This subplot, while seemingly disconnected from the main pilgrimage narrative, establishes Tang Sanzang as someone who understands loss, duty, and the complex web of obligations that bind human relationships, qualities essential for someone undertaking such a momentous spiritual mission. As the pilgrims journeyed ever westward, they began to understand that the physical distance they traveled was less significant than the internal transformations taking place within each of them. The novel structure, with its 81 tribulations, was not merely a counting of battles won and obstacles overcome, but a carefully calibrated spiritual curriculum designed to address the specific weaknesses and attachments that prevented each character from achieving enlightenment. The number 81 itself carries profound significance beyond its mathematical properties. In Buddhist tradition, the journey to enlightenment requires the overcoming of 81 delusions or mental afflictions, desires, attachments, and misconceptions that bind the soul to the cycle of suffering and rebirth. Each tribulation the pilgrims faced corresponded to one of these delusions, and only by confronting and transcending all 81 could they complete their transformation. This meant that every demon attack, every moment of doubt, every temptation was not a random misfortune but a necessary lesson, perfectly calibrated to their spiritual needs. When the pilgrims finally approached the end of their journey, they discovered they had only faced 80 tribulations, and the celestial authorities deliberately created one final trial to complete the required number, revealing that the universe itself was conspiring not against them, but for their ultimate spiritual perfection. Throughout the journey, the relationship between Sun Wukong and Tang Sanzang evolved in ways that illuminated the complex nature of enlightenment itself. Sun Wukong possessed tremendous power, supernatural perception, and quick intelligence, yet these very gifts became obstacles. His impatience with his master's perceived foolishness, his pride in his own abilities, and his tendency to solve problems through violence rather than compassion all represented aspects of ego that needed to be tamed. The golden circlet that bound his head was not merely a tool for Tang Sanzang's protection but a physical manifestation of discipline and restraint, the very things Sun Wukong most resisted yet most desperately needed. After 14 years of hardship, danger, and spiritual refinement, the pilgrims finally approached their destination, the Western Paradise, where Buddha resided at Lei Temple on Vulture Peak. The landscape itself transformed as they drew near, becoming increasingly sublime and otherworldly. The air grew pure and fragrant, celestial music could be heard in the distance, and the very ground seemed to radiate spiritual energy. Yet even at this final stage, the journey held surprises that would challenge everything the pilgrims thought they understood about their quest. When Tang Sanzang and his disciples finally arrived at Lei Temple and were granted an audience with Buddha himself, they received what they had traveled so far to obtain, the Buddhist scriptures that would bring enlightenment to the people of the East. Buddha instructed two of his disciples, Ananda and Kasyapa, to guide the pilgrims to the scripture repository and provide them with the sacred texts. However, when Ananda and Kasyapa presented the scriptures, they deliberately gave the pilgrims blank scrolls, expecting a customary gift or offering in return for the genuine texts. This was not simple greed but reflected a tradition in Buddhist culture where teachings should not be given freely without the recipient demonstrating proper respect and commitment. Tang Sanzang and his companions, having no material wealth after their long journey, could offer nothing, and so they accepted the scrolls without realizing they were blank. It was only when they had traveled some distance and opened the scrolls to examine them that they discovered the deception. The pilgrims were initially devastated. Had they journeyed for 14 years, overcome 81 tribulations, only to be tricked at the very moment of their success? They rushed back to Lei Temple to confront Ananda and Kasyapa, and this time, they offered the only valuable item they possessed, Tang Sanzang's purple and gold alms bowl, which the Tang Emperor had given him at the journey's beginning. This exchange satisfied the customary requirement, and the pilgrims received the genuine scriptures. But Buddha, observing all of this, smiled and explained a profound truth. The blank scrolls were actually the most sacred texts of all, representing the wordless transmission of enlightenment beyond language and symbols. However, because the people of the East were not yet ready for such advanced teachings and needed written guidance, Buddha allowed them to receive the written scriptures instead. This episode illustrates a central Buddhist concept, that ultimate truth transcends words and texts, yet words and texts remain necessary tools for those still on the path to enlightenment. With the authentic scriptures finally secured, the pilgrims began their return journey to China. But as they traveled eastward, they were suddenly lifted into the air by 8 Vajra guardians, celestial protectors who had been assigned to watch over the pilgrimage from the beginning. These guardians transported the pilgrims and their precious cargo back across the vast distance they had spent 14 years traversing, completing the return journey in a single day. This supernatural transportation served multiple purposes in the narrative. It demonstrated heaven's approval and support for their mission's completion, it showed how spiritual advancement can transcend ordinary limitations of time and space, and it ensured the scriptures would reach China swiftly. However, as they flew eastward, the celestial guardians deliberately caused the pilgrims to drop into a river one final time. This was not an accident but a calculated act to ensure that the pilgrims faced exactly 81 tribulations. They had only experienced 80 trials during their westward journey, and the cosmic order demanded the complete number. This final, seemingly minor tribulation of getting wet in the river completed the necessary cycle, allowing their transformation to be perfect and complete. It revealed that even what appeared to be accidents or setbacks were part of a greater design, and that spiritual development requires the full completion of necessary trials, not stopping even one step short of the goal. Upon their return to the Tang court, the pilgrims were received with great ceremony and celebration. Emperor Taizong, who had sent Tang Sanzang on this mission, welcomed them as heroes and had the scriptures carefully examined and copied so they could be distributed throughout China. The historical impact of these scriptures, or rather, of Xuanzang's actual translated texts in real history, cannot be overstated. The real Xuanzang spent the final 19 years of his life translating the 657 texts he had brought back from India, producing Chinese versions that became foundational to East Asian Buddhism and influenced spiritual thought throughout China, Korea, Japan, and beyond for more than 1,000 years. But the novel's ending extends beyond the earthly celebration. After presenting the scriptures to the emperor, Tang Sanzang and his disciples were summoned back to the Western Paradise, where Buddha granted them their final rewards and transformations based on their achievements during the pilgrimage. Tang Sanzang, having completed his mission with unwavering faith despite his physical limitations and occasional errors in judgment, was elevated to Buddhahood himself, receiving the title of Sandalwood Merit Buddha. This represented the ultimate achievement. The humble monk who began as Golden Cicada's reincarnation had now returned to the highest spiritual status through his own merits and efforts. Sun Wukong, who had begun the story as the Monkey King imprisoned for rebellion and pride, received the title Victorious Fighting Buddha, a name that acknowledged both his martial prowess and his spiritual victory over his own ego and impulsiveness. Most significantly, the golden circlet that had constrained him throughout the journey simply vanished from his head, because he no longer needed external restraints. He had finally achieved the internal discipline and wisdom that the circlet had been forcing upon him. The removal of the circlet without any ceremony or announcement symbolized that true freedom comes not from the absence of restrictions but from having transformed oneself to the point where restrictions are no longer necessary. Zhu Beiji, whose journey had been marked by constant complaints, laziness, and lustful thoughts, received a somewhat lesser reward. He was named Cleanser of the Altars, a position that still granted him immortality and a place in the celestial hierarchy but reflected his incomplete transformation. Even at the journey's end, Beiji had not fully conquered his appetites and desires, and his title essentially meant he would be responsible for consuming leftover offerings at temples, a humorous acknowledgement that he had improved but remained fundamentally who he was. This gentle humor in Beiji's reward suggests that the spiritual path does not require everyone to achieve the same level of perfection, and that even partial progress deserves recognition and has its place in the cosmic order. Xiao Wujing, the most steady and uncomplaining of the disciples, received the title Golden Arhat, acknowledging his reliability and consistent virtue throughout the journey. The White Dragon Horse, who had carried Tang Sanzang for the entire pilgrimage without complaint or recognition, was finally acknowledged and transformed back into his true dragon form, becoming one of the 8 celestial dragons who protect Buddhist teachings. His transformation demonstrated that even those who serve quietly in seemingly humble roles are seen and valued by the divine order. And so the journey that began with a monk's vow and a monkey's imprisonment concluded with transformation, elevation, and return. But Journey to the West suggests that endings are always beginnings, that enlightenment is not a final destination where all struggle ceases, but rather a transformation that opens new possibilities for serving the greater good. The scriptures that Tang Sanzang brought back would help countless beings find their own paths to enlightenment, and his disciples, now elevated to divine status, would continue their work of protecting and guiding seekers for eternity. The novel closes with all the celestial beings rejoicing at the pilgrimage's successful completion, the heavens celebrating the return of those who had been lost to redemption, and the promise that these sacred texts would bring wisdom and compassion to all who encountered them. It is an ending filled with joy yet tinged with the recognition that every ending is simply another beginning, that every achievement opens new paths, and that the journey toward wisdom and compassion never truly ends. It simply transforms into something new, carrying forward the lessons learned and the connections forged along the way, echoing through time as an eternal reminder that the path to enlightenment is walked not alone but together, not through perfection but through persistence, and not despite our flaws but by learning to transcend them through patience, courage, and unwavering dedication to something greater than ourselves.